If there's one deck I've played longer than any other in Vanguard, it would definitely have to be Garmor. But if there's one deck I've played almost nearly as long, it would definitely have to be Blau's. Now, Blau's came out all the way in the early days of Vanguard in BT04 and were what we referred to at the time as a ride chain, which is very similar to the ride lines that we have in Standard today, with each of the lower grades in the ride chain having skills to find the other pieces in the ride chain so that you could consistently ride Stern Blau Kluger as much as possible, who maintained a certain level of competitive relevancy in the early days based off the strength of his on-hit restand, and is most certainly a direct inspiration for the Avant-Garde series of cards that we have today. It wouldn't be until the Link Joker era that we would see Blau's become their own full-blown archetype, with Stern Blau Kluger getting a pretty direct upgrade in the form of Galaxy Blau Kluger, who maintained Stern's on-hit restand but extended it to your rear guards with Blau in the card name as well, which created a very dangerous guarding game for your opponent. It would be at this time as well that Blau's would even get their own archetype-related break ride in Mon Blau Kluger, who itself would go on to spawn several other iterations as well throughout the game's history in G. But it's the archetype's V-Series support that makes the deck that we're talking about today even possible. Starting off with the list, we're going to start by looking at our Blau pieces, which we are running 4 copies of the V Galaxy Blau Kluger and 4 copies of Stern. Now, playing this deck, you kind of need to play both of these together. Both of these cards have the continuous skill that as long as the grade 2 Blau Kluger is in your soul, all of your grade 3 units with Blau in their card name get plus 10k. This effectively makes all of your grade 3s with Blau in the card name, which is just these two, perfect beat sticks within the deck. And since you use them in tandem with each other constantly anyways, and have ways of calling them from the Vanguard or soul to rear guard, makes it so that you almost always have a strong beater that is not going to be shut down by a single defensive or even a heal guardian. Really how this all works is we have Stern Blau Kluger, who has the skill that at the end of the battle it attacks, we can bind a Galaxy Blau Kluger from our rear guard and then ride it as stand on our Vanguard by discarding 2 cards from our hand. Meanwhile, Galaxy Blau Kluger has the skill that when he's ridden over, you can call him to a rear guard, and when he attacks, you can counterblast 1 to call a Stern from soul to rear guard. So basically your desired attack pattern is going to be having a Galaxy on rear guard, swinging with that Galaxy, swinging with our Stern. Stern will then bind and ride the Galaxy, and then Galaxy can swing and counterblast to call out the Stern. So we are going to have just this alone is a way to create 4 attacks with just these 2 cards. These are basically the heart and soul of the deck, and it's a good thing that this deck has plenty of ways of finding them and getting to them as consistently as possible. The next pieces we'll talk about in the Blau archetype are going to be the 4 copies of the grade 2 Blau Kluger and 4 copies of Blau Panzer. Now, both of these cards have very similar skills when on Vanguard, being that when they're placed, they allow you to check the top cards of your deck to add something with Blau. Blau Panzer allows you to check the top 5 for a Blau, and Blau Kluger allows you to check the top 7 for a Blau for a counterblast. The other skills they have are just really what help make this deck hum, with Blau Panzer having the skill that when placed on rearguard, you can discard a trigger unit to find any grade 3 card with Blau in its card name from your deck and add it to your hand. So it can be worth running other grade 3 Blau pieces if you want to. I just haven't personally felt the need to. And we also have the other skill, the rearguard skill on Blau Kluger, which lets it, after attacking, to go into our soul and draw a card. So we don't have to just ride Blau Kluger to get it in soul to make the plus 10k buff on our grade 3 Blaus live. Even if we don't ride it, we can still call it to the board, swing with it, get it into our soul, and drawing us a card at the same time just makes this work really, really good. This is also one of the decks where the starter actually matters. So we are going to be running Blau Younger as the starter because Blau Panzer specifically needs to ride over Blau Younger for its skill to go off. Now, there is certainly an argument to be made for you to run the original Blau Younger as well, because whenever the original Blau Younger is ridden over by Blau Panzer, it allows you to search for Blau Kluger from the deck and add it to hand, so you can always guarantee that you'll have Blau Kluger as your grade 2 ride. Honestly, either of these is perfectly viable. At the moment, I'm going for the V version, just because if I end up going second, I don't miss out on that extra draw, and more often than not, I end up getting the ride chain off anyways. So if you really want to, I mean, this can even be a situation of where you run the original Blau Kluger as well, just because the original Blau Kluger has the ability to become a 10k if you have Blau Panzer in the soul. So if you end up running you can run like a single copy of this in the deck to have a 10k defensive line as well. Personally, haven't found too much of a need for that to be the case, but those are certainly some options that are worth considering as well when playing this deck. With our main Blau engine out of the way, we'll go ahead and take a look at the other grade 2s we're running in the deck, and I've gone with 4 copies of Cool Hank and 4 copies of Spiral Breaker. Now, these should be pretty self-explanatory. They're both restanders in the deck, which more often than not, you should ideally be targeting one of your grade 3 Blaus, so that way you can just swing with a more than likely 27k beat stick as many times as possible. Cool Hank has some extra utility in the fact that he's not a terrible ride, so if we happen to miss riding Blau Kluger, Cool Hank isn't half bad, and honestly neither is Spiral Breaker. You can kind of get some early aggression in with Spiral Breaker if you really want to, but the other reason to run Spiral Breaker is the skill to pitch it at the beginning of your ride phase, as long as you're on grade 1 or less, to check the top 5 cards of your deck for a grade 2 or less card. I really like this because it just gives us more opportunity to get into our Blau pieces that we want to ride up into. So even if we don't have Blau Panzer or Blau Kluger in Soul, we have the option of ditching the Spiral Breaker to have a chance at finding them in the top 5 cards of our deck. So just another piece that not only adds aggression to the deck, but it also adds a level of consistency that I have found very, very valuable. If you saw my Victor profile, you'll know that I wasn't running these at a max playset just because I didn't want them to get cloggy, but that's really not an issue in this deck. Honestly, the restand from him is almost secondary, just because being able to add a level of consistency to finding our ride up pieces is really, really great. Next, we'll talk about the rest of our grade 1s, which are honestly fairly toolboxy, just because Blaus have a lot of different pieces that are worth running, honestly. And this is the current lineup that I'm going for. I'll go over another option you could consider as well. But we have 2 copies of Morgenrot, 2 copies of Varuna Blauwand, 2 copies of Rima Blaurakit, and 2 copies of Extreme Battler Gunsden, and we also have our Sanctitude as well. Morgenrot is a piece that I wasn't very sure on at first, but the more I played it, the more I loved it, just because between having Blau Kluger being able to get out of the way after it attacks, and having something like Morgenrot, which retires itself to return one of our rear guards with Blau to our hand, honestly makes it so that against certain matchups, you can basically empty your board, so that way you don't have to deal with those specific pieces getting locked or retired or what have you. Varuna Blauwand is in here just because it's an archetype specific perfect guard, and also basically acts as a mini Dismal in this deck as well. And since it has Blau in its card name, we can grab it off of our ride up of Blau Panzer and Blau Kluger. Rima Blaurakit is a card I would love to run more copies of, and honestly, if you want to, you can certainly find a way to try and finesse more copies in there. It's honestly, most of these cards here are worth running as a 3 of. I'm just being very greedy and running them at 2 of so I can fit more pieces in here. Rima Blower Keat, though, is just a resource machine. Whenever it's placed on rear guard, if you have the same or more damage than your opponent in the damage zone, you get to countercharge and soul charge. And then at GB1, when your Vanguard's attack hits, you can put it into the soul and draw a card. So another piece that can potentially get itself out of the way, emptying your board and replenishing your hand too, which is very, very good. And then Gunsden, I feel like, should be self-explanatory. I feel like it's almost basically mandatory in any Nova Grappler deck, just because being able to give most of, if not all of your board resist is just too good. Because some of our strides do have the limit break keyword, you could even try and find an excuse to run something like Frogmaster as well, just to make that live even when you don't have the 4 damage. But if you're me, you just don't have that problem and you just always have the damage, or the main reason is because you don't want to heal out of your 4 damage, so that limit break enabler is certainly very helpful. But you could also just be like me and just never heal out of it, and then you'll be just fine. Now we'll go ahead and talk about triggers, and starting off the heals, I am running a 2-2 split of the Heal Guardian and the Blau heals. So with the same story as with the Blau Perfect Guards, we have the Blau heals, which I think are already creeping into a lot of decks since the errata, but this being Blau in name allows us to grab them off of our top deck searches with Blau Panzer and Blau Kluger. So if you see these, you can grab these and have a easy G guard ready to go. And it also gets heals out of the deck, so you don't have to worry about healing out of your limit breaks. And then Heal Guardians, of course, are just always going to be solid and provide a level of much appreciated early game defense. Next, we'll talk about our crits. We have 4 copies of the newly errataed Extreme Battler Break Pass and 3 copies of Kitten Pickin. Kitten Pickin is very valuable in this deck just because this deck revolves around the 2 grade 3 Blau pieces as much as it does. Ideally, we really don't want to be discarding them to stride as much as possible. So having this is certainly helpful. And then Break Pass with the new erratas from History Collection, I feel like these crits are just very valuable. Having a crit that's worth being checked on defense is very cool. We don't really get the skill to tuck them into soul because we don't really have too many cards in the deck with Victor in its card name. I think there may only be 1 in this deck, in the Stride deck, which we don't really go into ever, but purely just for the sake of it being a draw on defense and a crit on offense just makes it worth running. If you want to, there is certainly a argument to be had to run the Sar Blauglance crit, which, in addition to being Blau in name, so it is searchable, it has the ability to turn 2 cards face up. Notice I said cards, so this could be damage, but it can also be locked rear guards, which can be very helpful as well if you're worried about coming up against chaos. If I were to swap some numbers around to try and make room for it, the only thing I would probably take out is maybe the Break Pass, just because the Kitten Pickin brings so much value in being a stride crit, so that way we don't have to discard our grade 3 Blaus. But that's kind of where I'm falling with the crits in the lineup so far. And lastly, to round out our trigger lineup, we have a single copy of Twin Blader, the Draw PG, 3 copies of Energy Girl, and of course our one of Overtrigger. Need to have 4 PGs, I feel like, so the only place I could find to fit one was in the trigger lineup with the singular Twin Blader. You could maybe try and shuffle some numbers around and run a 2-2 split of this Twin Blader and the Blau PG, but I don't think that's necessarily needed. Obviously, we're going to be running our Overtrigger, and Elder Breath is just kind of a cracked Overtrigger. And then lastly, I have the 3 copies of Energy Girl, who just kind of adds to the overall aggression in this deck. If all of the Vanguard swings you're doing don't end the opponent, the additional swings of your Blaus on rear guard with the restanders you have in this deck definitely will. Having a high number of attack turns in this deck is not at all uncommon, and just I've won many games with this deck just through the sheer amount of attacks that I pump out alone. But with the main deck out of the way, we'll go ahead and talk about the G deck. And getting it out of the way, we do have the Harmonics Messiah. If you don't have it, it's understandable. It is very expensive, especially if you weren't like me and just hung on to what was basically a completely useless card for the last 9 years of this game. So if you don't have it, it's perfectly understandable. It does suck that it is as needed as it is, or that it can be as valuable as it is. But if you don't have it, I wouldn't feel too bad. Getting into the more interesting things with the strides, though, we are running 2 copies of Blau Kluger and a single copy of Sunny Blau Kluger. Both of these do fairly similar things. They just take different routes to get there. Sunny Blau Kluger is the one we probably go into the least, just strictly based off the fact that it is a limit break 5, which is sometimes scary to get to, and also runs a risk of being healed out of. Even if you're running Frogmaster doesn't work with limit break 5 skills. So if you hit a heal during the drive checks of your Sunny turn, it completely shuts this off, which again is another reason why I run the Blau heals, because it gives me a chance to kind of like pull him out of the deck to avoid healing out of my limit breaks. Sunny Blau Kluger at the end of its battle allows you to search your deck for a grade 3 with Blau and add it to your hand, and then at the limit break 5 you can discard 3 cards from your hand and put it back into the G zone, ride a grade 3 Blau from your hand as stand. And Blazar does a very similar thing, instead being limit break 4, only needing to be discarding 2 cards from your hand, but it also requires the card you want to ride to already be in your hand. It doesn't search it the way Sunny does. More often than not, Blazar is going to be the thing that you go into and is going to be the thing that creates the most attacks in a given turn. Next, we've got a single copy of Merciless Dragon. This is a very strong card and a lot of times can be your finisher if you go into it. We have enough restanders in the deck that we can go into this. And all of our restanders are free or cost soul, which is basically free in this deck. So we're able to kind of, if we have the CB and we have the restanders, we can go into this and spend all of our CB just on Merciless to just beat the opponent down if we need to. And we also are running a single copy of Asdabulk because worst case scenario, I guess you can restand your front row. Honestly, the G deck in this build is fairly fluid. As long as you've got your Blau pieces, you're probably fine, and maybe Merciless. If you're going into anything else, you're probably just in an awkward situation or on a losing situation. So you don't want to be going to these other things as much as possible, but there's room in the G deck to make room for these pieces. We're also running a single copy of Universe Ace Bustard, which this deck can make fairly good use of with the way it is able to accrue soul between things like Rima Blower Keat and things like that. So you can usually get a fairly solid Bustard turn off. It's not going to be an insane 10 drive check double restand Bustard turn, but solid enough in a pinch. We're also running single copy of Favorite Champ Victor just because sometimes this can be viable. Again, this is a very fluid G deck, so if any of these pieces don't work for you or are too expensive, you can feel free to just fill them in with just about anything else. We've also got the Drigger. The GB8 for Nova Grappler is absolutely insane and can create some insane amount of attack turns, especially in this deck with the amount of riding and rewriting that we do. It is not uncommon going second to consistently be able to make 3 Excel markers in a turn. So if that goes on a couple of turns, you'll have 6 Excel markers, which just makes this an absolute monster for your opponent to be staring down. And then interestingly, this is one of the only Nova Grappler decks that I'm running this in, but it is the Progenitor Dragon of Horizon Limit, Origorum, who is fairly easy to go into with the amount of searching we have in the deck. both for just Blau pieces in general, but also for specifically our grade 3 Blaus. So it is not very difficult at all to set us up into a position where we can go into this. The main thing that I noticed with this deck is that your main play tends to be going into likely Blazar and then re-riding into one of your grade 3 Blaus, which then turns on your continuous skill to give your grade 3 Blaus that 10k buff, which is kind of what makes the extra aggression worth it, is that you have this beater that you can go into. If at any point you can't do Blazar because you don't have enough damage or something like that, not having the beatdown capabilities of having a like 22 to 27k beat stick, Origoron basically lets us force that to happen by dropping our opponent's power to 0. So it's basically an alternate way to get to the same destination and has the added benefit of giving us free stride for the rest of the game. Now we'll go ahead and look at the G-Guards. I'm running a single copy of Gundreed in this deck. If you want to, you can definitely run 2 to try and maybe make a Turbo to GB8 play viable. Haven't really needed it, but it is certainly an option. We've got 2 copies of Dogun Titan, which is, in a pinch, one of the easiest and highest shield G-Guards we can go into. I am running the double stiff need in this build as well, just because of all the counter charge that we have in the deck. You definitely can have the opportunity to go into 2 of these. And then I have a single copy of Unior, which I know if you saw my Victor profile, I said I wasn't running, but I'm kind of coming back around on. I have such a weird relationship with this card, but I'm kind of on an upswing with it. So it's got some plays defensively, especially running the Blau heals like we are. It is certainly possible to go into stiff need, kind of blast away all your damage, then pitch the Blau heal, soul charge off the Blau heal, then go into this and get 2 free damage back. Like I said, the G deck is still fairly fluid and there's a lot of room in it. So like not all these pieces need to be 2-ofs necessarily. So feel free to, if you build this deck, feel free to experiment as you would like to. Okay, now I'd like to try and show off the combos in this deck. There are really kind of like several, but this is probably the best way for me to show you as many as possible in one go, and the main sort of game plan that this deck has. So in a situation like this where we're going to be striding into Blazar Blau Kluger, if at all possible, we do want to try and be on Galaxy for some reasons, but we'll go ahead, we'll pitch for our stride, and we'll go into Blazar Blau Kluger. Now at this point, depending on what we're facing up against, you can definitely use the Gunsden here to give some resist around to the board, but like I said, that's definitely matchup dependent. So at this moment, we'll likely just kind of swing with our Vanguard. With Energy Girl here, we'll probably just leave Energy Girl here alone right now, obviously, because nothing's rested. We swing with Vanguard, we do our drive checks, so we get our 3 drive checks very quickly, no triggers. Very typical. We'll then activate Blazar Blau Kluger's skill, counterblasting 1, putting it back into our G deck, taking a grade 3 Blau from our hand, which we want to be having Stern, obviously. We'll go ahead and ride that Stern. That Stern will then give us another Excel marker. We draw ourselves a card off of that, and the Galaxy, when ridden over, calls itself out to Rearguard here. So now is when things can get even more fun, because this is when the attacks really start to fly here now. And we can go ahead and we'll swing, you know, probably with both of these Galaxies at this point. So there's 2 more swings, and at this point is when we'll go ahead and we'll swing with the Stern. We'll go ahead and do our drive checks. We'll get a stand, which is pretty great because then we can stand one of these Galaxies, which is going to be a 27k attacker, and our second check is nothing. And that works out even better too, because then we can discard the cards from our hand, which I just realized I didn't discard for the other one. Doesn't really matter, we're just doing a demonstration. To then bind this one that's rested, because you know we want to save the attack. We ride it, we get ourselves another Excel marker, and draw a card. At which point we can swing with this Galaxy again. Swing with the Galaxy on Vanguard, activating his skill to counterblast 1 and call out this Stern from our soul, creating another 27k beater. And this time we can go ahead and boost as well, and we'll only get the single drive check, which is nothing too fancy. And then we can send the Energy Girl back to the deck to restand this Blau Kluger, this Galaxy Blau Kluger once more. And at this point is when we just kind of start swinging. So we've already done a handful of swings. I'm not even going to try and keep track of this. Maybe I'll keep track of it in post, and I'll show up what we did. But we can just swing with the Galaxy here. We then swing with the Hank. The Hank pitches, restands, swings again. We got the same thing here. We can Soul Blast and restand and swing again. I think I may have real quick, I do think I may have Soul Blasted out the Blau Kluger that was in Soul, but just don't say anything about it in the comments, okay? Look, I realize I did it. It doesn't matter. This is just a demonstration. If you're really gonna come at me because I'm trying to show you how to play the deck, bro, that's really kind of... And then we have our Stern swing here too. So a lot of attacks, 3 of which were Vanguard swings, several more of which were these 27k swings on these Excel markers. And then at the end of the turn is when we can retire this Morgenrot to bounce this Stern back to our hand. So if that for some reason did not kill the opponent, we have a Stern in hand ready to do it all over again. Let's see, we definitely got something to stride with, so just in case, you know, obviously. But basically you're able to, with the Morgenrot, that's why I like the Morgenrot, because it allows you to kind of set up these scenarios and be ready to just do the same thing all over again.